Older MacBook Pros start to smell pretty bad on the inside. Best described as a combination of melted crayons and BO, it makes working on your older MacBooks a little bit less enjoyable. So today I'm going to show you how to at least mostly get rid of that smell on this 2012 MacBook Pro model A1278, aka the stench machine. We're going to start by turning the MacBook Pro over and taking out these 10 screws. Just using a Phillips 0 screwdriver, I'm going to remove these screws around the perimeter. Now, the top right 3 screws are a different height than the rest of them, so just take note of that when you're reassembling. Now, technically, there are 3 different kinds of screws on the back here, but the other 7 can be used interchangeably, and I'm actually using some random screw I found for the right middle screw here, so, it's whatever. Once you've removed the bottom plate, you're going to want to unplug the battery, which can be found in the bottom right-hand corner here. So just use a plastic spudger to pull that connector up, and you're good to work on the rest of the computer. Now, before doing anything else, I'm going to remove the RAM to show you most of where the stink is coming from. You technically don't need to remove the RAM at all for this process, and I had a real struggle taking it out because I didn't remove the battery completely first, but I wanted to show you where we're trying to get at so you're not just following this guide blindly. Underneath the RAM, you're going to notice that there's this black plastic sheet. It's not super huge, but that's where most of our smell is coming from. So that's what we're trying to get at, and in order to remove that, we have to take out the entire logic board, which is actually less intimidating than it sounds, since this model of MacBook Pro is pretty easy to work on. The process for removing the logic board is pretty straightforward. It's a series of unplugging and then unscrewing different parts on the MacBook. The big thing here is you just want to keep track of the screws, as there are a couple of different sizes. I recommend using a magnetic board and then laying the screws on it in their relation to one another. And iFixit has a super great board for this that I like to use that I'll link below. And speaking of iFixit, they have a really great breakdown of where everything on this laptop disassembly is. So instead of trying to explain that as well as they do, I'm just going to link to their guide in the video description below, so be sure you check that out. I will point out that by far the most difficult thing to do here was remove the speaker assembly, so just be careful with that. Use a plastic spudger or plastic tweezers. I used metal and that kind of roughed it up a little bit, so that was my mistake. But once you get the logic board out, you can get a pretty good view of the black plastic piece that we're trying to remove. Now, you can't remove all of the black plastic here because the chassis of the laptop is aluminum, and you need something between it and the logic board so nothing shorts out. But this small piece here is a slightly different material that does smell significantly worse, and it's redundant, so we can get rid of it without having any issues. I'm just going to apply some isopropyl alcohol and then use a spudger to remove it, and then we want to remove as much of the adhesive residue as possible. This was actually a super frustrating process. The adhesive had gotten really hard over time and it wasn't loosening up with just IPA. So I spent an obscene amount of time trying to get it all removed. I finally resorted to some electronic tweezers and I scratched most of it off that way. Now, these tweezers are super pointy, so I did my best to make sure that I didn't puncture anything, but I did scratch up the plastic a little bit. And finally, after getting most of the glue loosened, I went back over it with alcohol, a brush, and then the spudger again, so it ended up pretty okay. Now, there was this strange glitter in part of the residue, so when I used the brush, it kind of spreaded that around. I don't know what this glitter sort of substance is. It seems like it might be gold, but that wouldn't make sense to me because the whole point of the plastic is to not short out the logic board, but I'm sure there's a reason for it. I just don't know what it is. I'm just pointing this out because the black plastic did end up a little bit sparkly, and I thought that was strange. Now, once the alcohol is all dried, you simply need to do everything you've done, just backwards. So reference the iFixit guide and follow those steps in reverse. And the big question is, does it actually remove the bad smell? Well, I couldn't tell right away because, kind of predictably, everything smelled like rubbing alcohol. So I had to let the machine sit for a little bit, and then later I opened it back up and it mostly worked, but not completely. Now, that's been my experience, but I've seen a couple of conversations online that said that it worked for them completely. So maybe I just didn't scrub hard enough, and I suppose I could go back and rescrub, but this worked enough for me. And it did reduce the BO crayon smell quite a bit, so I consider that a pretty big win. The most important part of this whole process is here at the end. After every repair or maintenance project, it's important to power your device back on and check to make sure that everything works and you didn't break anything. And it looks like we're all good here, so there you have it.